Hello everybody and welcome to this new tutorial. Today we are going to learn how to leverage the type system of TypeScript to make Taquito safer. You are going to learn a few techniques to use TypeScript the best way possible to make your Tezos application using Taquito safer and more efficient. So let's get started. The first technique that I often use is template literals for Tezos addresses. That way you can be sure that the string that you pass to different functions in your application are valid Tezos addresses. It's very simple to do it. You can create a type for account addresses. TypeScript is going to make sure that the string that you pass starts with TZ1, TZ2, or TZ3. You can do the same thing for a contract address, and TypeScript is going to verify that the string that you pass starts with KT1. After that, you can join the two types, and I often create a function to cast a Tezos address into a string, so I can pass it to different functions in Taquito that require a string. Now, let's see some examples. In the first example, you can see that the contract address for the UUSD contract is typed as a Tezos contract address and starts with KT1. A user address that starts with TZ1 is going to be typed as a Tezos account address. After that, you can use it in Taquito. For example, when you need to create a contract abstraction, you can pass the address that you created with the Tezos contract address type directly into Taquito using the function that casts the Tezos contract address type into a string. The second technique is about creating types for big map keys and big map values. That way, when you are looking for a value in a big map and you pass a key, you can be sure that you're passing the right value. And then when you receive the value from the big map, you can be sure that the value is going to be of the right type. Here, for example, we are going to interact with the big map where the key is a pair with an owner field and the token ID field. The owner is a Tezos address and the token ID is going to be a big number. The value in the big map is going to be a big number too. The third technique is about typing the contract storages. Very often you are going to interact with contracts. You have to rely on Taquito to return the storage and you don't know exactly what the storage is going to look like. It's a good idea to type the storage so TypeScript has an idea about the shape of the object that's going to be returned by Taquito for the storage. The example here for the type storage is an object with different properties. You can see, for example, that the ledger is a big map abstraction, so we know it's a big map, and then you are free to type the other properties according to your use case. For example, you can change the total supply to a big number because that's probably the value that's in the contract storage and that Taquito is going to return. You can see here we have an example of how to use a value of type storage. After creating the contract abstraction, you can call the storage method on it, and instead of returning any, it's going to return the value of type storage. And next, we have an example of how to use the types you created for a big map. So the key is going to be an object of type ledger key, and then you can pass it to the get method on the ledger property of the storage to return the value associated with that key in the big map. The next technique is about typing the functions for the contract entry point calls. By default, Taquito is going to type the parameters for such functions with the any type, but it may be better to provide a strong type for the functions, so you can be sure that you are going to pass the right parameters. For example, to contact an FA2 contract and send a transaction to the transfer entry point, you want to type the parameters properly to make sure that you send the right data and your code works properly. The type for the transfer entry point looks like that. It's going to be an array of transfer param, and transfer param is an object with the from property, that's a string, and then an array of transactions where each transaction is represented by an object with the to property, a token ID property, and an amount property. On line 55, you can see how we can type that entry point. After creating the type, we can now create the value associated with that type. So for example, here a parameter that we are going to send to the transfer entry point of an FA2 contract. Now you can see how we are going to bind that type to the transfer entry point that's provided by Taquito. So you just call the transfer method as you would usually do, but you put it between parens and then you type it as transfer entry point. And now if you try to pass another type of parameter, that doesn't follow the type transfer param, you're going to get an error directly in your editor. To finish, let's see two techniques that are pretty simple, but that can prevent a lot of bugs. The first one is to coerce arrays to contain one unique type. In general, when you send an array through Taquito to a contract, it's because the contract expects a list. And in Michelson, the list must have the same type of elements. But you know that JavaScript is a little bit looser and you can put any type of value inside an array. So it can be interesting to make sure that the array that you are going to send as a parameter to a smart contract can only take one type of value. Here is an example of an array that can only contain numbers. And if we try to push test or undefined, for example, it's going to fail. The last technique is about pairs. Pairs are a very common type of value to send to a smart contract entry point. So it can be interesting to work with them directly in JavaScript and make sure that you don't introduce any bug. To do that, you can create an array in TypeScript that can only contain two values, and you can type each value. Here, for example, we have a pair where the left value is a number and the left value is a string. For example, we have a contract entry point that takes a number and a string. So Taquito is going to expect two different values that are going to be paired together under the hood before being sent to the contract. On the JavaScript side, you can put the values that you are going to send to the contract inside an array with two fields. And then when it's time to pass the parameters to the contract call, you can spread the array using the spread operator. Using this method, you can be sure that there are going to be only two values in the contract call, and the values are going to be of the right type. And that's it for this tutorial. I hope you learned something new. If you have questions, don't hesitate to leave a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next tutorial.